Welcome to Justice Talks, your voice, your vote, our democracy. The United States election is less than 3 weeks away, and we are again facing a critical election. Our discussion today will be focused on our role and responsibility as people of faith participating in political systems and how we can maintain hope in the midst of divisiveness. My name is Amy Hong, she, her pronouns, and I serve as Assistant General Secretary of Programs here at Church and Society. For participants who are blind or low vision, or perhaps just listening, I am a Korean American woman with shoulder-length black hair wearing a light blue shirt. I am excited to be moderating this webinar with Bishop Julius Trimble, our General Secretary, and Reverend Kendall McBroom, who serves as the Director of Civil and Human Rights. I also want to acknowledge Amber Gaines, our Engagement and Development Manager, who is providing support for this webinar. Before we begin our time together, we first want to acknowledge that where the United Methodist Building is located in Washington, D.C., is the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Anacostan people who lived for generations neighboring the Piscataway and the Pamunkey peoples. We gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral lands we gather and the diverse Native communities who their home here today. Throughout the discussion, please submit questions in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. We will answer as many as we have time for at the end of our discussion today. So to start our conversation, I'd like to first ask Bishop Trimble about this notion around separation of church and state. I think many believe that this means that faith and politics cannot and should not intersect. So, Bishop Trimble, what is the real meaning and function of this separation?
Thank you, Amy, and welcome to beloved of God who joined us on this exciting conversation and a critical point in the history of this nation that has implications globally. I'm Bishop Julius C. Trimble, the General Secretary of the General Board of Church and Society. My pronouns are he and him. I wear glasses. I have gray hair, a mustache, and dimples. I have on a purple shirt and a gray suit. Glad to be with you. Let me first begin by reading briefly from our book of discipline under our social principles on the political community, and then share some comments that I shared at the celebration of the 100th anniversary of the United Methodist Building here in Washington, D.C., that really give us a driveway to our conversation. Paragraph 164, the social principles, the political community. While our allegiance to God takes precedence over our allegiance to any state, we acknowledge the vital function of government as principal vehicle for ordering of society. Because we know ourselves to be responsible to God for social and political life, we have a commitment to many things that the work that we do in terms of the General Board of Church and Society. The Constitution establishes a separation of church and state, although that term, separation of church and state, does not actually appear in the Constitution. What appears are two clauses: the Establishment Clause, which prohibits the government from establishing a religion or favoring any particular religion, and the Free Exercise Clause, which protects citizens' rights to practice their own religion. Our involvement in the political system is rooted in the gospel initiative to love our neighbor. So to put it succinctly, we are expected to be good stewards both of creation and our rights, which include expressing our voice and our vote. These are the comments that are a brief excerpt from comments I shared at our celebration of the 100th anniversary of the United Methodist Building. In the United States, many of us were raised to revere a particular narrative about the separation of church and state, that its founding purpose was to safeguard from those in power their will over the faith journey of another. There shall be no established state religion. And this is well and good, something to be elevated and indeed revered. But that's only one part of the story. When we pan the proverbial lens back to take in the great breadth of the human story, we can see that there is an equally critical side to this essential principle of separation of church and state, one that acknowledges that the relationship goes in both directions. Dear beloved, the separation of church and state is foundational to the free exercise of the prophetic voice that we all have a right to. It is the necessary context that enables those of conviction to have the ability to hold those who have power accountable. Our human history is stained red whenever the prophetic voice has been muzzled, having been co opted by the serene song of earthly power. And so, as bearers of the prophetic call, we who are United Methodists continue to not only celebrate our advocacy alongside the vulnerable and the marginalized, but we stand as champions for separation of church and state, mindful that the advancement of God's promises depend on it. Listen, this is what I really want you to hear. This separation is not a locked door. It's somewhat of a dance between those who advocate and those who are often sitting at deciding tables. And when such is the meeting of people of mutual good faith, the possibility of miracles and the common good is advanced. So we are encouraged, according to the scripture, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and all who dwell therein. Jesus says, seek ye first the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, and all these other things will be added into it. But we are encouraged to participate in the building of beloved community as Christians, and that also includes exercising our right to vote.
Thank you so much, Bishop Trimble. So a question for both of you. Knowing that now, according to the social principles, the book of discipline, the book of resolutions, we know that we need to be engaged, and that it is important for people to exercise their power to vote. So what is at risk, particularly at this current lay of the land? What is at risk if people don't vote in what's going on in the issues in the world today? I'll leave it up to both of you all.
Yeah, so if it's okay, Bishop, or did you want to? Okay.
No, you go ahead,
Okay,
please.
I'm just gonna jump on in. My name's Kendall McBroom, for those that may be just listening. I am a adult. I just found out I'm not a young adult anymore, so I'm gonna just say that. In his 30s, pronouns he, him, his. Black man with beard and curly hair, wearing a gray shirt. And what is at risk socially is the breakdown of democracy. So democracy is on the line by not voting, participating civically in this engagement, in this election, and then more in tune with us as Methodists, and more important to us as Christians, is the watering down of our witness in the public square. Jesus's miracles, many of them, as is retold in the Gospels, take place, and even if you look later into the New Testament, do not take place in private places, but take place in public squares, so that all can see the flourishing, the manifestation of this kingdom of God and this beloved community. And so, by not participating, by not being activated, by not only voting, but getting others to vote, bringing people with you to the polls, making sure that your family and your community members are engaged in um, the civic life of this community and of this nation, or of the nations, will put at risk democracy and put at risk our witness as independent, as individuals who've been called to be light and salt in this world.
Can I just add on to that? Thank you, Kendall. Again, speaking from our social principles, we believe that the government must be held accountable for protecting the innocent and guaranteeing the basic freedoms and liberties of all of its citizens. So when we don't vote, we are advocating our responsibility to help our government be the best it can be to the benefit of the whole of the human family, and in this case, the common good for its citizens. Abraham Lincoln is uh, reported to have said that the goal of government is to lift the weights of all citizens and to elevate the condition of human beings, men and women, all persons who are part of that citizenry. So we're concerned particularly about the vulnerable, the marginalized, those who are poor and often overlooked or overstepped. And we're also concerned about making sure we elect persons who care about those things that we think are paramount. For example, creation, for example, restorative justice, for example, a living wage, for example, addressing those things that keep people from living a life full of equity and dignity. So it does matter if we vote. Our vote is actually an opportunity for us to express our voice, to create the kind of society that we want to live in.
Yes, definitely. And if I can add on to the conversation that has already been shared, is that there is in the preface of the political community of the newly adopted social principles, it says that our involvement in politics in the political system is rooted in the gospel imperative, right? To love our neighbors and to do justice and to care for those that are vulnerable. And so I feel like in that, it is a clear um, statement on what happens if we don't do anything and if we are not engaged in the political system um, as we should be, as we're called to be. Another question that I have for both of you, and I think for many, and I include myself in this, is that there is a trepidation and fear as we approach the elections brought by the deep polarization that we see in this country right now. Um, what does it mean for United Methodists to approach the elections with a sense of hope and opportunity? How are you both approaching the elections with hope?
At the end of the day, God will still be God and the church will still be needed. We must be, I'm paraphrasing uh, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and we must be harbingers of hope, prisoners of hope. And I believe that our work will continue regardless of who is elected, but we should invest our vote in making sure that our vote really reflects that which we hold to be critically important. I think we should denounce, and I want to take this opportunity to denounce any violence that's associated with the difference of opinion we might have politically, theologically, ideologically in our society. Jesus said we are not only to love our neighbors, but also to love those whom we might deem to be our enemies. So I think we really must model the kind of society that we want to have and recognize that no person who is elected is responsible for our soul salvation, but they could have a lot to do with the quality of life for all of us who live on this planet. And so it is a critical election, but it's also important for those of us who are people of faith to be ambassadors of peace and to be harbingers of hope and collaboration and respect. To respect both our right to have safe elections and our right to live in a safe society where people do not work out their differences with violence.
Yeah, absolutely, in total agreement. And I think one of the things that Bishop Trimble shared, I think in the last answer, or in this answer, early on in this answer, was the church will still be needed. Someone will still be hurting. Someone will still be marginalized. Someone will be othered. And someone will still need a prophetic voice, or someone will still have a prophetic fire in the midst of whatever happens on November 5th. And also, taking into account that November 6th will come after. And so one of the ways in which I think that we've been called as Methodists and even as Christians to enter into the civic space is realizing, yes, the notion that we have dual citizenship, right? And the duality of that, but also realizing that this is not our final place, but we work while we are here. And so should a particular or not a particular candidate, ours or maybe not our candidate, become elected, um, there is still work to be done on behalf of the faithful to bring about this fullness of the kingdom of God. At times that is priestly and at times that is prophetic. And so in understanding that, I know personally one of the ways I'm doing this is surely sticking close with the scriptures and much prayer, but also being active and serving as a judge at my local precinct. And that is something that we all can do. I will let you know that if you are in the DMV area, they are still accepting applications for judges. So you are more than welcome to sign up and register for that. But that's a way that we engage, and that's a way that we also keep our head in the midst of this chaotic time, not by sticking our heads in the sand, but by being engaged and being a presence, allowing the Spirit of Christ to be made evident in our lives and in the places and spaces that we go. And one of the things that the social principles did discuss was about free and fair elections, um, and with those, the absence of violence. And so we really want to ensure that, just as if you would not get into a fight at a t-ball game, or a little league soccer game, we don't do that in this political climate. But we move in civility, and as people of faith, we move from a place of love and understanding and walking with people rather than excluding them or causing them harm.
For both of the responses. And Kendall, you kind of already alluded to this a little bit, but a question for both of you is, what are some concrete ways that United Methodists can support the health of democracy during, for a fair and free election?
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, Bishop. Did you want
No, you go ahead. Go ahead, Ken.
to?
I'll follow up on you.
Okay.
I'll follow up.
I just would say, one, first and foremost, poll workers are still needed. NPR has talked about the shortage. Different web news information have talked about that. News stations have talked about the shortage of poll workers, and so that is one way to viably be a part of. Um, that's a way to be a part of the democratic process, in much needed. I also see where Lisa Mitchell has noted poll observers. Absolutely, they are much needed. Someone else in the chat has talked about poll chaplains, and that is something that we've talked about throughout. Is that people are coming to the polls anxious. They have anxiety about the issues, about the candidates, but simply as a Methodist and as a Christian, by being present, by being present at the polls, you are able to offer a word of prayer and a ministry of presence, if you will, that allows people to know that everything will be okay, even if it doesn't feel okay, even if it doesn't seem okay, even if it is chaotic in this moment. All will be well. And here, allow me to offer myself to walk with you through this journey. These are ways. And then just in your local congregation, I see where Amber has posted the toolkit. That was one of the things I was going to share, was have a watch night service that Monday night before the election, and being in prayer, being intentional in your prayers. I know of a rural church or a church in North Carolina that this evening they're actually, because early voting kicks off tomorrow, they are actually having a prayer service. So they're praying over the ballot. They're praying over the children. They're praying over the family. with songs and prayer. And thinking about what Scripture tells us to do and how it tells us to act in this way is not just for Sunday morning worship or Bible study, but it is truly for the breadth and depth of our life and lived experiences.
These are some wonderful recommendations that are appearing in the chat, and I just want to commend our audience for helping one another. This is just an exciting time. I count it a privilege to be on with you. My wife and I did early voting because I'll be out of the state that we live in during the election day, and as we were approaching the county building, there were people who were meeting the legal requirements to be so many feet away from the actual voting area, but there were tons of signs of school board elections and so forth. And I want to remind you that it's not just the president, but it's all of these. Your school board matters. Your county commissioners, the governors, every office matters in terms of your participation. But something I also noticed was uh, there was an absence of any signs of just peace. One of the things we could do is those who would be poll chaplains, and you don't have to register with the government for this, is show up clergy. I'm saying with your clergy collars, and maybe if you had a sign that said "Love your neighbors," you're not campaigning for any particular uh, 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 candidate. Love you, but reminding people what the gospel commands us to do, and trust me, that would be such a powerful witness. We could kind of feel the anxiety going up the closer we got to the ballot box because we were inundated by all the signs that people had up on the lawn before we could get to where we had to cast our vote. And I'm reminded too that we can't vote our way to heaven, but our vote could help reduce the amount of hell that people experience here on earth in our society. So think of it that way. Some people say, well, my one vote doesn't count. Oh, but that boy, it does. Because you're exercising a right and a privilege that's still protected in our current democracy, and we want to retain that right and that privilege as people of God. The second thing I often say: little prayer, little power; no prayer, no power; much prayer, much power. So prayer meetings do make a difference. And the third thing I would say is that what about helping someone who's differently abled, Amy, to make sure they get a chance to vote? So we've already voted, but we're thinking about are there some other persons that might need transportation or may need some assistance or may need to be connected to a way to make sure that they are able to cast their vote?
I can listen to you both talk forever. It's just really encouraging, and thank you so much. And we just heard you share, being present and praying, and being of service during this time. I also know that Church and Society has been, producing a lot of resources, and Kendall has been very prolific in creating resources for in effective participation in the electoral process. And so, Kendall, I was wondering if you can share some of those resources for people that are joining that could use for small groups, for themselves, for their congregation.
Yeah, so two things that came to mind from that, and thank you so much for that, Amy. Two things that came to mind were a book study. One of the book studies that were talking about there were three book studies that were put in the toolkit that Amber dropped in the chat not too long ago. 4-week studies that basically go through the book and the chapters and then questions for group discussion. One of those books was Subversive Witness. And what it does, that book really talks about is how we use our privilege to essentially empower those around us, and not to hoard it for ourselves and only seek our own um, security, our own peace, but that of the communal. So, Subversive Witness is a book that I would definitely recommend engaging in as a congregation, because as we shared earlier, um, November 6th is going to come after November 5th. and we have still been called to both vote and to act post the election. So I highly would encourage that. And then on the other side of that, resources, we did have some sermon starters. Now these are not your entire sermon for clergy. These are not your entire sermon. You are going to have to sit with the Holy Spirit to craft that message according to your context. But some of the texts that have been used in that were the Micah 6:8, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. And so in exegeting that text and your context, you are able to speak to what does it look like to love God and to do justice and love mercy in this climate, in this small town, in this neighborhood, and how does participating in voting, civic involvement, how does that address that? And then lastly, the third one I would bring up, there are music resources, there are poems that are included in there that talk about the importance of civic engagement in particular. And then lastly, what I wanted to bring in, because this is a Methodist platform, is starting within your congregation, small or large, starting to do what historically had been called Wesleyan holy clubs and social clubs. But these would be small groups that would come together, not in a spirit of strife, but more so in a spirit of community and seeking to learn and hear and be open to what the Spirit is letting you know as to how to engage in this moment. As we have mentioned throughout this call, the social principles are a foundational document that a foundational as well as powerful document to use to navigate the thoughts about voting, the actions of voting. There are many ballot measures on the ballot, many measures, legislative measures on the ballot this year. Take time in that holy club to sit through and talk through those measures in conjunction with the social principles, to talk through that and really build that. And so that's what that, and it talks about in the toolkit. It lets you know how to kind of get that off the ground and what the thought process is behind that.
Thanks, Kendall. Oh, yes, Bishop.
Just wanted to comment. I see some of the exchange in the chat. You won't hear the three of us endorse a candidate. That's not something we can or would do. But the social principles do say that the church should continually exert strong ethical influence upon the state, supporting policies and programs deemed to be just, opposing policies and programs that are unjust. So we vehemently oppose voter suppression, for example. And we know that that is taking place in some states. So we believe people should have access to vote. People should not be prohibited from exercising their voice and their vote. And they should be able to do that safely and know that our vote is counted. So it is important for us to think about what is our particular assignment. Now, I've already voted, so I'm asking God, what is my assignment? Now, part of it is being on this webinar right now, but how do we maybe consider participating in sign acts? Like we gave the example of poll chaplains and prayer meetings, and I see one church is offering cookies and cake and so forth. So, what are things we can do to really demonstrate that they will know we are Christians by our love, by our love? In fact, I'm quoting Paul Chilcote in his latest book, who says, what if the United Methodist Church, and I'll expand that beyond the we're known as the most loving and welcoming and affirming church in the world. Part of that would be I think, really pave the way for us to fully participate in this election, as well as participate in the healing of America, regardless of who is elected in our election process.
Thank you for both of the responses. And this is going to be our last question, but before we look at some questions from the participants that are here with us today, and it's kind of been answered, but perhaps you can go a little bit deeper in it, is that like the hard truth of elections is that, there can only be one winner. And as Kendall has said, there is November 6th. It is coming. It's gonna happen. And so in a time of divisiveness, you know, the election results can escalate the divisiveness that we already have. And so how can, as United Methodists, how can we stay grounded and committed to the work of justice and peace?
I think we really have the onus upon us to be as best we can non-anxious presence, but also anticipate. We should maybe plan ahead of time for services of prayer and support, and continue to remember that there have always been elections, and there have always been persons that uh, uh, were disappointed by who was elected. But we also still have a responsibility for caring for our neighbor and for caring for one another, regardless of who's elected. So I think being proactive as best we can regarding that, engaging in interfaith and an ecumenical collaborative work, uh, we can do that as well. And recognizing that sometimes that we need to create space for lament, and grieving uh, one's disappointment.
Yeah, I echo those words, those sentiments, honestly. And I just wanted to put this into the atmosphere. There was a quote that we wanted to use in the toolkit, but did not get a chance to. But it came from Sojourner Truth, an abolitionist of the 18th century. And 18th, 19th century, who was a formidable human being, also connected to the Methodist tradition. And these are some words that she said around whenever early on the women's suffrage movement was trying to kick off, or even I should say during that time women were seeking the right to vote. She says, "Now, if you want me to get out of the world, you had better get the women voting soon. I shan't go till I can do that." And I think what that speaks to is that win or lose, and if we don't know for weeks, um, the the position or disposition of ourselves and of our faith communities must be that we are going to be committed to this work of justice and peace, um, throughout our lives, throughout every election, throughout every chaotic or calm moment. The work of justice will be our guiding light, as Jesus is our guiding light, and we do that because it is one of the things that we committed to in our baptismal vows. One of the things I love about the Methodist baptismal vows is the question of, will you renounce all evil and oppression? And I'm paraphrasing now, but in thinking about that, it means that no matter who is in the White House, no matter who is in Congress, while it matters and is important, um, there will always be a duty for us, regardless, in spite of, or because of who is in that position. But that does not sway that position does not sway our responsibility to be engaged in this work. And so, in saying that and in sharing that, I hope that gives you not only a reassurance, um, but it would give you a little bit of fire, a little bit of fuel for your fire, to be able to continue this work, and know and know that the days will keep moving, the work will still need to be done, but you can rest in the assurance, that this is the work that you are committed to, throughout this season and throughout all seasons.
Thank you. Yes, Bishop.
Yeah. I just got the story from about Lily Cunningham, one of the oldest persons living in America, from Florence, Alabama, 110 years old. and she's looking forward to voting. Born in 1914, women did not get the vote until the 19th Amendment was passed, I believe, in 1920. And Lily Cunningham was an African American woman. She did not get the vote until the Civil Rights Bill was passed. The Voting Rights Bill was passed in 1965. Why do I say that? Uh, Sometimes the struggle is long and hard for us to really bring about the kind of justice we want to say. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is noted to have said in the 1960s that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. He said that in the 1960s, but it's really a quote from the Reverend Theodore Parker in 1853, who said the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But Theodore Parker really, Kendall already gave you the real answer. He really got that from Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require? But to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. What am I saying? As General Secretary of GBCS, I'm saying our work is long and hard, but it does require arc benders, people who will help bend the arc, the moral arc towards justice. And some of that is done through our exercising our right to vote. So I care about certain things. I care about childhood poverty. I care about the number of people who are caught in human slavery, even as we are speaking right now. I care about the fact that there are too many children going to bed hungry, not just in Gaza, not just in Sudan, but right here in the Washington, D.C. area and right in Chicago, my hometown. So these are things I care about. And those things I care about and the social principles is not a bad place to look as you determine, if you haven't already determined, what will help guide your prayerful discernment on how you will vote.
Thank you so much for your responses. So we are going to pivot now and kind of look at and answer some of the questions that you all have been sharing in the Q&A. So thank you so much for putting those questions in there. One question that I want to ask both of you that came in, what are your reflections on the dangers of Christian nationalism?
I think Kendall's an expert on it. let me make my comment quick and get out of the way. And I'll own this. This is the Trimble response. I think Christian nationalism is an oxymoron. It's a contradiction of terms. It's kind of like a jumbo shrimp. Is there really such a thing as Christian nationalism? Those terms seem to be conflicting. The gospel says, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, and all these other things will come later." So, but I'm not nearly as sophisticated or the deep theologian that my brother and colleague Kendall is, and he can weigh in on that. I think we've done whole webinars on Christian nationalism. I think I was on one a year ago. Kendall?
Yeah, no, so Christian nationalism, if we place this in the context of how it even came about, is not
Oops. Are you there? Or is that just
the
my
head.
computer?
Can you hear me?
You go
Okay,
ahead.
okay.
You
Okay.
were
You
frozen for a
might
minute.
want to repeat what you shared, though.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to share that it is Christian nationalism, I think, has gotten a lot of attention most recently in the last kind of two elections due to its prevalence and due to the rhetoric that has been used and this visibility, I would say. However, it is something that is in so many ways we've been dealing with as a nation for a long, long time. It is a heresy, if we can call it such, due to the fact of it diminishes the sovereignty, power, and the genuine awesomeness of Christ and of God and of the entirety of the Trinity, and it places in its stead its connection with white supremacy. And so one needs the other in order to function fully. And so when we're asking or seeking to know what are the dangers to democracy and what are the dangers to this election, it really sets up everything that Bishop Trimble talked about earlier as far as the separation of church and state. It creates a nation based off of a state sanctioned religion, having a state sanctioned religion, which is what the founders were actually fighting against. It is not considered um, a while it has true implications as far as the violence, the harm, the terrible theology, and the poor theology. Um, in the breadth and depth of theological ideologies, it holds no weight. Because, as Bishop's mentioned, it's an oxymoron and it's also heretical in nature. Um, America is not the city on a shining hill. Uh, it is not those things. And to place ourselves in those positions does damage not only to our democracy, but it does damage to the power and the authenticity of our witness in the world.
Yeah, for me, it's been said that love and hate cannot be contained in the same space. For me, being a Christian disciple, follower of Christ, Christian nationalism can't really go together because it denies the gift of diversity. It denies the gift of the opportunity for us to really accept people in their various uh, cultural and creative um, selves. And some would it put it in the form of a question: is Christian nationalism just a new edition of manifest destiny, white supremacy, with some icing on the top and some Bible verses? So I don't know if it's not welcoming, if it's not inclusive, if it says that there are some who have been chosen and all others are to be excluded or to be submissive to that form of government, then that really is contrary, I think, to the founders of the intent of the Constitution as it has been written.
You.
And I just wanted to add on to Bishop Trimble real quick because that point about the attempt to diminish diversity and thinking about what Paul says, because we have held up Paul in such highlight, right? In as far as theology and the Christian tradition, Paul throughout so many parts of New Testament and the letters that are attributed to him says, "Now therefore there is no longer Greek nor Jew, and all of these things, and slave nor free." And so, in understanding that, realizing that diversity is a gift. It's not taking away these identities. What it is saying is that these identities no longer are reason for people to be separate, are reason for people to be in silos, but that we can all live together because of the beauty of salvation and the beauty of Christ. So I just wanted to add that on because Bishop Trimble teed it up, so I had to.
Blame it on the general secretary. All right, next question,
Next
Amy.
question.
We gave too much time to Christian nationalists.
So here's the next question. So the churches, we all have the 501c3 status. So what can churches do and say that will not put at risk the 501c3 status?
So what churches can say is they oppose issues. It has to be issue based. I oppose or I support this issue, values based. Per the IRS and per the IRS, and I'm coming at this more so as a former pastor who had to deal and navigate that line. What we cannot do, what churches cannot do, is endorse candidates. You cannot from the pulpit say, I support, or we as a church support this candidate and are pledging money to this candidate, to this campaign, are holding events for this candidate, for this campaign. They have to be nonpartisan. They have to be inclusive. And that is one of two things that I know cannot be done from the pulpit or from the local church.
Churches can, and often there's a long history of churches inviting persons who are running for public office to introduce themselves in the context of worship or other events. That's not an endorsement if you have people who are, visiting, but you can't do it for one and then exclude others who may be of an opposing party to do that. But I do, in the churches, I think it's important to recognize that there's a diversity in our churches. Everybody doesn't have the same political bent or may not be part of the same political party or any party at all. I think, but churches can encourage people, and we can't even mandate people vote or participate, but we can encourage people and say, this is part of our, again, I go back to our social principles, part of who we are as people of faith. We want to make our society better, more reflective, because our mission as United Methodists is to make disciples of Jesus Christ, get this, for the transformation of the world. So part of our ability to transform the world is to help shape a more perfect union, if you will, with our participation in the political process. So I don't think it's not our greatest influence would not be, in my opinion, by endorsing candidates anyway. Our greatest commitment should be to make sure that there's significant turnout and helping people not be prohibited from exercising their right to vote. I certainly endorse things like taking people to the ballot box, helping persons who are shut in, helping people know about how to, as Kendall has said, if you wanted to volunteer and participate in the process. And we always are called first and foremost to be. Jesus said, "This my house must be a house of prayer." So I think that would be his mandate for us.
So, in the same vein, what are your thoughts on how we can encourage children to become future voters when they become of age?
I just want to share that for this question, I think the best example or the best teacher is experience. Taking a child to the polls with you makes a difference. I can remember whenever I was a child going with my grandparents and my mother to go vote. I can remember not too long ago. Well, I can just remember those things in particular, but I know that not too long ago I came across a voting card from my great grandmother who was born in 1903. She's of course since passed, but um, she had a voting card from when she registered to vote, and it was like her card had that she first registered in the 1950s. Now, was she able to vote? Whether or not she was able to vote, I'm not sure, but definitely know that she was registered in the 50s. And as one of her descendants, it made me feel it was a sense of pride, I think, that I took in knowing that my ancestor participated or at least was seeking to participate in the political process. Children, both as children and then as they mature into adults, really take hold of those things. And that is a deep and a great history and a great legacy to leave for, I would believe, your child or your grandchild, your niece, nephew. Um, and also, if there are any educators on the line, I just want to share this as a former educator, is that setting up elections in your classroom, mock elections in your classroom, get the children in the mindset of voting, and having the conversations now, I think, and having the action now is something that really would be impactful down the road.
This is phenomenal, Amy. I haven't. I just got a great, brilliant idea. You want to hear it? It's
Sure.
This is you're gonna love this one. I think any reason to have a party is a good reason. So why not have one at home the day you go voting or election day? Say we're gonna and have a cake and say what are we celebrating? Well, we had a chance to exercise our right to vote, and we're having a party. So any reason to have a party is a good reason to me. And don't you think that's a brilliant idea, Kendall? I just thought about that. Maybe people already are doing it. I don't
Think so. I think so. Any-
know.
I definitely think, as a parent of two young children, and they're 10 and 9, and that age, they love stickers. And so,
Oh,
one of the things that I've like my husband and I have taken our kids when we went voting, and we get those stickers, that said I voted, and they just love it, and
they do.
there's
That is so
excitement
true.
around it. And so I think starting them young, I think is very critical, and talking about what's important, values and things like that around dinner table, I think is also really important to get kids to start thinking about it. And
The power of
definitely,
story, the power of
oh
story too.
yes,
We tell our children who are now adults, uh, every year on their birthday, we talk about their birth story. I think telling stories, telling the story of voting to children at a very young age, it's just a good thing because it's a true story, and you can even say about voting, but this is what I and help explain that this is why we did what we do. I see there's a request for materials to be generated by church and society.
yes, definitely. And I think I know that Kendall mentioned some resources as well, and I think they've been dropped by Amber. Thank you so much, Amber, for dropping them in the chat. Definitely. And I think we have time for one more question from the chat. And so the question that I would like to ask you both, and it's kind of three of these questions can actually kind of fit together. There's kind of skepticism around voting. Does it really matter? There's electoral votes versus popular votes. Does voting matter? And how do you respond to comments from people in the pews that may say, church just should not get involved and our vote doesn't matter?
um, I want to come at it from two angles, and then I want to come at it from two angles. For those that would say that your vote does not matter, and I'm sharing this because this is a religious and a church crowd. Um, if you think your vote doesn't matter, just don't show up to a church meeting that they are voting on carpet colors.
Mhm.
Because you will find out very quickly that your vote matters and it makes an impact. This is no different in so many ways. While I know I wanted to use that antidote, but this is no different than your vote mattering in an actual civic election. While I know there is concern with the electoral college and it has its flaws for sure, your vote still matters as it relates to that county board. It still makes to the county commissioners, your board of commissioners. It still matters as it relates to the people that are living and doing and working and overseeing your day-to-day activities. So your school board, your state elections, your state senators, your state congress, your state representatives, your all the way to the dog catcher. There was a position I remember one time in a local election back home, water and conservation person, and I didn't know what that person did, but as I found out, as I learned the civic process and learned what that person did, that person was responsible for all of the farmland and water and aggregation in the irrigation in the farmlands of that rural county. Um, so I just say don't let anyone ever tell you that your vote does not matter because it makes a difference. It makes a difference, and particularly, especially in the day to day of your family, of your community. it makes a difference. It makes a difference as far as jobs being available. It makes a difference as far as accessibility to resources, to the local. I'll use a perfect example. It makes a difference as far as access to the local Medicaid office and your Department of Social Services. It makes a difference. So don't let people tell you the myth that, oh, my vote doesn't matter because it won't put the president in office. Well, I can tell you what, if you don't vote, what it'll do. It'll make sure that you don't have a voice about what happens in your child's school, or what happens in the curriculum, or what happens as far as the jobs to your area, the access to health care, the access to resources, food, quality food. It matters. It matters.
Yeah, I don't think we can guilt people into voting, but we can give people the power to vote and recognize their vote matters. It matters. Look at the Supreme Court. Look at the current state of reproductive rights. Look at the state of childhood poverty. It matters. Your vote matters, and um, it matters particularly in the aggregate, but it also matters individually because it gives you a story to tell that you have participated and you've followed your conscience and your commitment to participate in making the world a better place.
Thank you.
I have an article coming out soon saying vote for the common good. So look for it.
Well, this brings us to the end of our discussion today. Thank you so much to Bishop Trimble and for Kendall for being part of this rich and fun discussion. I think there's going to be a lot of voting day party planning happening coming up. Thank you all to those that are watching and listening and for joining us for this important conversation. A recording of this discussion will be on our UMC Justice YouTube page, and a link will be sent in a follow-up email. So thank you again for joining us today, and we'll see you at the polls. Bye.
Happy voting.